Okay. Hello, everybody. Hello, hello. I am so happy to greet everybody today. Welcome. My name is Miriam Kaba, and I am the founder and director of Project NIA. And I'm welcoming you this evening from Lenape Land in New York City in Manhattan. And yeah, we're really happy to have you. We're really happy today to be joined by Centera Matthews, who will be walking us through a wonderful resource that she created based on a set of audio stories created by Catherine Bocanegra and Grant Buer. The audio stories capture the pain of the losses suffered by those victimized by violence, while also underscoring their resilience. They also hold those who've harmed others in their dignity too, which is a rare feat. You can access the resource if you haven't already done so by looking through the curriculum that was linked in the invitation. And I'm also going to be, let me see here. I'm also going to be dropping a link to the curriculum in the chat. Um, Also a link to the actual original audio stories that I'm also going to be dropping in the chat. Very much recommend, obviously, that people listen to the audio stories before you take on working through the curriculum as you decide to facilitate it in your own communities. A few years ago, I asked Centera, who's an educator and longtime Project NIA volunteer, to take on the daunting task of developing a curriculum resource based on Catherine and Grant's audio stories. I'm so grateful to Centera for saying yes and producing this amazing resource that we will be engaging tonight. We have a great team that worked and is working this evening to bring you this session. Special thanks to Eva, who has held down the significant logistics for this event. This session is part of Project NIA's fall series titled Building Your Abolitionist Toolbox. Our goal in the series is to explore 6 different resources that help us build daily practices to move us closer to a world free of imprisonment, policing, and surveillance. Together, we are learning how we can use abolitionist organizing tools and values in our relationships, our homes, our schools, our organizations, and our communities. We are considering how we can deepen discussions about justice and harm and healing. And we are diving into active ways that we can work towards an abolitionist horizon that includes everyone. Our next session and final session of 2020 is on December 3rd, and it will be facilitated by me, yours truly. And I will be previewing a new curriculum resource for educators and organizers who are working with young people to interrupt punishment mindsets. Don't ask me if I've actually finished the resource yet, because the answer is a categoric no. So we'll see how it goes. Show up on the 3rd and see how it ends up. The registration link will go live next week and will be posted on our social media, Facebook and Twitter, Project Nias. We have an incredible team with us today because everything worthwhile is done with others. We have Sadia Khan and Carly James, who are our ASL interpreters, and we'll have interpreter next to their name, and they'll be pinned on the screen. We unfortunately were set with our live captioner until just a few minutes before we started. And they let us know that they had a family emergency and could not be part of this today. We have someone who is, kind enough to have said that they could try to step in and do an offline live captioning option. And I don't know if Sarah's on here already, Sarah Nixon, but if you are, please speak up in the chat so that Ebony can be in touch with you. But hopefully we'll be able to work something out around that. Ebony Green is our tech director and has tech next to her name. And for any Zoom support issues or questions, Laura Chow Reeve of Radical Roadmaps is our graphic note taker today. You can find out more about Laura at her website, which I'm going to drop a link to Laura's website in the chat so that you have that. Um, and you should reach out to Laura for all your graphic note taking needs. We're also joined by Madeline and Lisa, who will generously be supporting the chat in questions and other supports for today. So thank you to both of you for joining us. About chatting, you're going to be able to chat with panelists and other attendees. If you have questions, we invite you to drop them in the chat, and folks will make sure that they're tracking the questions and can send those over to Centera for answers. Or if there are questions we can answer directly, they'll be answered in the chat. Sincere thanks and so much appreciation to the whole team for being here and supporting this session. So let's just get centered in our values for this event. I'm going to share some words that I appreciate and are adapted from Free Minds, Free People. And after that, I'll toss over to Centera to get us started. So we believe that at the center of liberation is radical love for each other and for ourselves. That love pushes us to try to create a better world. And because of that, we are working to minimize the amount of harm that occurs in our spaces. White supremacy, misogyny, ableism, classism, homophobia, and transphobia exist everywhere, even in radical spaces. They are some of the threads out of which normative society is woven, and it is really hard to untangle them. So if you're called out today, particularly in the chat in some way for perpetuating any of these, please understand that it is not because you are unimportant or that we wish to exclude you. Instead, we're trying to demonstrate compassion and care and do the least amount of harm towards the people in our communities, particularly those with marginalized identities. We recognize that we are all entrenched in these systems of oppression and that we all have work to do. We invite everyone to be accountable for their participation within these systems of oppression. We ask everyone to challenge themselves and to fight against it in these spaces. If you enact displays of power and oppression, we will talk to you. We will invite you to educate yourself and to relearn how to interact with others in the space without enacting harm. If you cannot or are unwilling to address it, we will ask you to leave. We need both love and rage in every part of our lives to carry on dismantling oppression. Both can be a part of radical resistance to the destructive world in which we live today if we put in the effort to truly learn from and care about each other. We seek to forge stronger bonds and create a community that we can rely on rather than systems of violence. So, being accountable to each other for our behavior is a really good way to start. With that, I'm happy to cede the floor to Centera, who will introduce herself to you. I've known Centera for many years, and we crossed paths in Chicago, and that's how we got to know each other. Centera would make the trips from Milwaukee to Chicago to participate in various Project Nia and other events that I was part of, and that's how we came to become friends and comrades. Centera is brilliant and committed, and you'll hear from Centera herself as she introduces herself more deeply. Thanks for joining us this evening, Centera.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for having me. I feel incredibly honored to be in this space, and I know I just love how much the events are rooted in accessibility and care. If we could turn to the next slide, that would be great. Okay, so my name is Centera. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin right now. Miniwake, coming from my land. I'm Menominee, it's Menominee land, as well as Oneida and Potawatomi. I'm an educator and organizer. I'm in early childhood education and have been for about 8 years, but have been a youth worker since I was a teenager myself. I didn't I teach from more of a transformative justice practice. And definitely Project Nia has been really responsible in that, just teaching how do we ground our work in care, transforming harm. And yes, but I'm also an organizer with Black and Pink Milwaukee. I do a lot of prisoner support work. If we could turn to the next slide, that'd be great. So here's the agenda for today. I'll talk about like the creation of the curriculum. I think that it would be really helpful for more people to create curriculum and ideas. So I just wanted to share how my process. We'll do a little preview of the Two Sides of Justice curriculum. We'll dive into some of the activities, and then afterwards, if there's time, we'll have a Q&A and discussion. I'm really excited to be here. As I said, I had a lot of caffeine today. And so I'm kind of feeling like maybe I'm talking fast or whatever. If it's harder to follow along, if I'm talking too fast, please let me know in the chat, and I will slow down. If we could turn to the next slide, that'd be great. Okay, so when I was given the task to create the Two Sides of Justice curriculum, what I did was just, of course, listen to the stories over and over and over again. Mary, oh no, never mind. I thought I saw someone was unmuted. I listened to them over and over and over again. Like one, I just wanted to listen to it. I thought it was just such a gift of people sharing their stories of being impacted by harm from the state, the punitive justice, as well as just sharing how they were healing and how they were offering others grace. So I listened to them and I noticed some overarching themes. And I wanted to begin from there to like piece together the curriculum. I noticed that the big themes were obviously justice, and three different types: punitive, restorative, and transformative. And then the other part was just seeing, another theme I saw was the impact that punitive justice, as well as in some of the stories, restorative justice, the way that that impacts everyone involved, not just the two people or the direct people who had been in the initial event where the harm took place, but like how the families were impacted by all of it. That's what you really get from this story. Another thing that I learned too, and another theme I saw, was just the gift of listening and sharing stories. So yes, that's what I wanted to root the curriculum in. If we could go to the next slide, that would be great. Okay, so creating the curriculum. So anytime I create a curriculum, and specifically with this one, I start with, what is it that I want people to know? What's the big idea? So you start there. And like I had mentioned before, justice, three different types of justice, as well as the impact that justice has on family. Those were the main themes that I wanted. So that's where I begin. From there, especially when I'm creating popular education, I move into how do I help people define the topic. So just literally being able to define transformative justice, punitive justice, restorative justice, and healing. And then moving into the history so that we can just understand the context for what that concept is. In this case, what's the history of punitive justice? I really wanted to create something talking more about transformative justice as well, but I didn't get to that. I know that there's more resources on that, like a lineage and a history of that should be coming soon from other people. Anyway, then I move into what's the current context for that concept? How is it being talked about? How is it being used in practice now, today? And then finally, just giving people the space to practice that concept, as well as offering next steps or next actions that people can take to help chip away at an issue, or to help broaden, like to help bring these ideas more to fruition. And I definitely learned that from Project Nia, as well as just practice. The importance of just practicing like what we want, the way that we want to be in this world. And then,
can
yes.
I hold you for 1 second?
Yeah.
Sarah has joined us, and there's a link in the chat to the live closed captions. So you have to click on that in order to be able to see the live captions. Thank you so much, Sarah. Literally, Sarah is coming after me getting in touch with them, 10 minutes before we started. So thank you so much.
Yeah, that's incredible, Sarah. Thank you. Yeah, so I just move into like the importance of practicing. How can you show people, um, how do we actually see, act, envision this concept that we're working on? And then another thing that I try to do also anytime I create curriculum is to offer as many primary sources or text as possible, just to give people something directly to interact with. I can talk all day, every day about a concept, give people definitions, but it's a lot easier to understand it when we can actually interact with something. And like the stories that are shared here are primary sources. I use a lot of different ones in there as well. If we could go to the next slide. Okay, so then how the rest of this will go today is we'll dive into some of the activities, and each way I will just highlight how this fits into the ways, the steps that I provided before. So I open up the curriculum with a definitions activity, and this for this activity, we're defining transformative, restorative, and punitive justice. There is an incredible text that's at the link, the bit.ly, the TJ Basics in there, and it comes from the Aorta Collective, and it just defines justice. So what I'm gonna ask people to do right now is just to look at it. We can spend 3 minutes just looking at it, looking it over, and then we will discuss it.
Can somebody drop the bit.ly in the chat from our team? Okay, I'm gonna stop you wherever you are. It's okay if you haven't finished the text because it's just always there.
But I'm just going to dive into the questions that come from the curriculum. So I'm going to ask the questions labeled A, B, and C, and then people can just write their answers in the chat, and then I can read them off. So the first question is, according to transformative justice, who's offered justice? Based on what you read, what you know, who's offered justice in transformative justice? Yeah, so far folks are writing everyone, community, ideally everyone. Yeah, great. So then I guess it's a similar question, but what people, organizations, entities are the recipients of this justice? Yeah, everyone. I mean, that's the goal, right? Community, the victim. The goal of transformative justice is essentially that everyone is receiving some type of benefit or justice after a harm has been caused. So how are people who have been harmed offered support through a transformative justice lens? Yeah, someone said it's particular to that person. Agree. Yeah, there's not like they should be the ones to determine what support looks like. Yeah, so the person who is harmed really is the one who has a lot of agency through transformative justice, connection, acknowledging that they are required, need healing, not punishment, and holding space for that healing. Justice doesn't depend on them fighting for it. Yeah, exactly. That's the goal of transformative justice. Yeah, maybe political education, connection to support space. Agreed. Yeah, it seems like folks here have a really solid concept of transformative justice, empathy. Wonderful. We are going to move to restorative justice. So, who's offered justice through a restorative justice framework when harm has happened? Person harmed primarily, just those who have been harmed, survivors. Great. Yep. And then what people, organizations, or entities are the recipients of this justice as well? Yeah, someone said primarily that restorative justice is primarily centered on the person who was harmed. Okay, great. And then we can move to C. How are people who have been harmed offered support? Through a restorative justice lens. Through a support group, primarily centered on person who was harmed, restorative circles, community resources, and some programs. Yep. Sometimes directed to some sort of community services, circle, therapy, mediation, classes, community service. Great. Yeah, it sounds like people have a really solid understanding about restorative justice. And essentially that's what this activity is. I know that like we're all gathered here probably because we're practitioners already working, grappling with these things. But when we're teaching or creating these learning spaces, it's just really important to just be grounded so that we all know from the get-go the definition, so that we have a common language, so that we're not wondering an hour into it, or even later down, a few days later, someone just didn't necessarily understand what that was about. We just want to at least try as much as we can to get on the same page. Someone in the chat wrote, survivors, harm doers, impacted community members, and even people who are not directly impacted can benefit from a transformative approach that centers survivors' definitions of accountability and addresses the root causes of harm in structural oppression and social norms and seeks to transform those root causes of harm. Wonderful. Yeah, I am super glad to be in a space with so many people who know about this life. And then finally, we will move to punitive justice. So through a punitive justice lens, who's offered justice? The state, institutions, the state, no one, property owners, the ruling class. Yep. And so essentially B is asking the same question, just trying to pull it apart more, like who are the people and organizations? And you all have already said pretty much it's just the state or no one or white supremacists. So then how are people who have been harmed offered support through a punitive justice lens? Yeah, they aren't, essentially, right? They aren't. And what I really appreciate about the handout and why I wanted to include it in this curriculum is that it just breaks it down really clearly. It's not this big chunk of text. It's a really short, easy piece to just provide young people or whoever in your community spaces just something like, here are some bullet points, just like look at, let's compare it. I mean, even in this conversation, even though it's through chat mostly and me talking to myself, we can just see how how these forms of justice are so different. So I just really appreciate that that document, and thank you all for engaging with this. So can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so after moving on from talking about like definitions in the curriculum, we move on to talk about what are the roots, history, or lineages of justice. So there's an option to do another definition activity, and you can do this. Let's say that you have more time and you just want to talk more about definition. You feel like, okay, maybe the crew of people you're working with a little bit get it, but want to go more into it. You can do something called a prison industrial complex mind map. It's actually an activity that's been in a lot of different, I know I've seen it in Project Nia, I've seen it in critical resistance activities as well. You can check it out in the curriculum, but it's essentially just asking people to think more about punitive justice. Where do we see it? How is it enacted? Who benefits from it? Just to get people to think about it some more. And then another thing, if you have more time, maybe you're working with a little bit older people or however that works, you know your people and who you want to, your audience, your community. Maybe you want to talk more about the history of punitive justice and really look at a historical timeline. So in the curriculum, there is a historical timeline on policing that I did not create, but I believe I got from Project Nia as well. There's also one in critical resistance that people can check out that is really amazing and really thorough. But it's just essentially getting people to understand in it, you're just with the historical timeline, just wanting to situate, like, look at this system has been around for a while, and this is how it's looked like over a period of time. Like if this isn't brand new, we're not just waking up to it, but this is how transformative justice has looked. It just helps to root the conversation some more. All right, if we could go to the next slide, that would be amazing. Okay, so after I would do definitions, historical context, I would want to talk some more about current context. How are different justices enacted and displayed nowadays. And so that is where the lovely stories from Two Sides of Justice comes today. For today, I'm just going to read brief excerpts from the stories, but ideally in the curriculum, if you have technology available to you, you would just play the stories for people to listen to. Today, I'm just going to read a little bit of it, and then you just get into a more conversations. I just want to give a content warning that the stories can be really hard to hear. The ones that I've shared will just be talking about, they'll be talking about loss. But a lot of the stories just share deep harm that has happened to families from all angles of experiences that happened. So yeah, we'll just have conversations about that. Okay. If you could go to the next slide, please, and then we'll jump back to this one, but the next slide. Okay, so this story is from a West Side grandmother who, from the West Side of Chicago. And in the Two Sides of Justice story, she talks about how her grandson was killed one evening by someone in her neighborhood. And she goes into sharing the story of what it was like to learn that something horrible had happened, then to verify that in fact he had been murdered. And then she shares about trying to seek justice and what justice meant for her. So I'm going to read an excerpt from her story. She says, I participate in the CCAP meetings, the community and policing meetings, and all of that stuff that's in the community. Some of the police, I mean, all of them are not bad, but you got some, especially on my block, are just so inconsiderate. She told me, she said, we're gonna start doing work on your block because they sell drugs over there. We need to know exactly who are the people that are selling. Like she wanted me to be some kind of informant. And I told her, wait a minute, what are you talking about? You guys want to know what's going on over on this block. You send someone over here to sit in the park and watch them. I said, I'm coming to you because I want to arrest the guy that murdered my grandbaby. She was talking like in a way where you wash my back, I'll wash yours. That's the way I took it, and I didn't like that. That's the kind of justice I get over on my block. But you know what? The police didn't kill my grandbaby. The little boy that he went to school with and knew, they went to 5th grade together. He killed my grandbaby. If we can go back to the next slide, or to the previous slide, that would be great. Okay, so in this story that the grandmother graciously told, what form of justice was enacted? If you could go, yeah, right here, this would be perfect. And you can feel free to put it in the chat. And I can also do a paraphrase. So essentially, she said that she went to her community policing meetings, and she went and she said that she was immediately asked, put to task to do more work for the police, to be an informant, when really she went there with the intentions of asking for help to find the person who killed her grandson. So in this story, and you can say the thing about these questions are there's no right or wrong answers. So like, what would you say, what type of justice would be enacted? Okay, so some people said no justice was enacted. It would have been punitive, but they didn't even do that. No justice, but the effort were towards punitive justice. Yeah, I would agree with you 100% that no justice was offered, but if it was, it would be punitive and punishing.
Tara, I'm sorry, I need to
go for it.
Someone is broadcasting this on another app onto social media. Whoever is doing that, please stop doing that right now. We don't want this broadcast outside. Like that doesn't make any sense. So please cut it out if you're doing that. And I don't know who your name is on there, so you're clearly on here. Thank you.
Okay, should we take a minute? Or
no, that's okay. I'm assuming they're listening. They're going to stop doing it. Thanks.
Okay. Yep. Okay, I appreciate that. Okay, yeah, so I would agree. I would say that no form of justice was enacted. that none. If it was going to be any, it was punitive. But yeah, none. And that's what the grandmother essentially said. So we'll move to question 2. What role did the state play in this story? How did the state cause harm or offer more healing? What role did the community play? And how did the community offer healing? So feel free to add those to the chat. Okay, yeah. So someone wrote the state attempted to make it transactional. There was outsourcing of surveillance work. The state tried to use someone's loss for their own gain. The police caused more harm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And ultimately, like, was there any healing? Putting the burden of anti community labor on a grieving mother. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Um, there was no role on the part of the community. Yeah. So then we'll move to question 3. What community or interpersonal interventions could have offered non-punitive justice and healing? What resources would be needed to facilitate these interventions? What social structures, relationships would need to change in order to promote this liberatory justice and healing? All right, someone wrote transformative with funding for community resources. I like that and I agree with that. The relationship with the police and the community needs to change. They need to be more involved with the community instead of transactional. Community support and conversations about what justice would have looked like for the grandmother, the family. Community members could have reached out to the person who killed the grandson to support him in taking accountability for the harm he caused and understand the root cause of why it happened, asking everyone harmed what they needed to begin some kind of healing. Yeah, I really appreciate all of these answers, and all of the thoughts that people shared. Um, Essentially, what this question is asking is just saying, or somebody wrote, are everyone's basic needs met to start an intervention? And so the purpose of these conversations is just really to help us dream, to like lift that ceiling off of our imagination and just to really think about breaking it down. If we really wanted to heal, if we really wanted to end violence and work through it, what would actually need to change and what needs to happen in order for that? Like what do we need to do in order to do it? These types of questions and conversations just help at least propel us towards that. And especially with young people, just to help us get out of this punitive culture. Someone wrote community healing circle to address the harm that was caused to the family and to the community. Yeah. Another thing I wanted to share that I'm just thinking as we're rolling through this is something I've learned through teaching is the importance of wait time. Like it's okay if people need to take a few moments to like really think of an answer or to like really process like all of the information they got. Like don't take silences or anything any other way than just people needing a moment. So that's okay. That's okay that we do that here, and that's okay in any learning space. If we could move forward 2 slides, I'm now going to move and read another story from the Healing Justice, or I'm sorry, from the 2 Sides of Justice curriculum. Yeah, so Lisa's story. Okay, so Lisa is a mother. I'll read the background. So a young man named Darren was killed as he attempted to rob another person. The person who killed Darren faced life in prison for his actions. Darren's mother, Lisa, shares her experience with the justice system below. Okay, so Lisa shares, Darren didn't deserve to die for making the worst decision of his life. And the other person doesn't deserve to spend any more time in jail for making the worst decision of his. I said, Your Honor, I just ask if you would show leniency in your sentencing for this young man. Someone will always be in a position to speak up for my son, but no one's here to speak up for you today, so I'm going to do it. Justice is being able to have my say, being able to tell the justice system what I need and what I want, and getting it. I got it. I hadn't thought about it like that before, but I did. This was a win because I got what I wanted. My voice was heard, and it was validated by the judge issuing a lesser sentence, showing leniency. And I probably needed to add a little bit of more um, context for the story as well. Lisa was able to share a victim impact statement in court during the person who had killed her son during his sentence. And so the middle paragraph, or the first paragraph on here, is just what she said in court. So if we could go back to those questions, I believe it's 2 slides before this one, that would be great. Okay, so in Lisa's story, what form of justice was enacted? I see restorative, I see punitive, punitive. For this one, because this one is like just a little bit trickier, would folks want to say why or write in the chat why you thought, just to have a more rich conversation? Like, why did you pick the types of justice? Someone wrote punitive with a restorative aspect, a single aspect, small scale restorative within the punitive system. An attempt at restorative, punitive for the harmer, restorative for the harmed, punitive by the state. Lisa tried to limit the impact of the punitive system. Yeah, I would have to agree that it was punitive. They tried to offer some type of concessions to the family. Someone wrote, punitive because there wasn't an opportunity to engage in a conversation or really look at a variety of ways that healing or justice could occur. Punitive justice was enacted in the sentencing with a token nod to the impact on the victim's family. Restorative justice functions within the punitive system often, and the mother was given space to share her voice, and she injected nuance, empathy, and care into a system that has none. Beautiful. I don't have to say anything more. You all had incredible responses to that. So number 2, what role did the state play in this story in Lisa's situation? How did the state cause harm or offer more healing? What role did the community play, and how did the community offer healing? Okay, someone said it doesn't appear the community was involved at all, and I agree. The community wasn't. And the state was just purely punitive. Um, so let's move to number 3. What community or interpersonal interventions could have offered non-punitive justice and healing? What resources would need to facilitate these interventions? Okay, someone shared connecting family members and the people who caused the harm if they could consent to. I can share from some of you have probably listened to these stories, or many of you maybe, but Lisa actually started an organization that offered support to young people impacted by state violence. That's what she did after this happened. And you learn about that through listening to the stories. Let's see, someone wrote, also the state dictates whether or not they even choose to take into account any part of what the victim wants. The state decides to be empathetic or not. Yeah, that's true. Someone wrote, addressing the economic inequity that forces people to commit crimes like robbery. Yeah, that's like big picture stuff. All right, well, we have forever to dream and think about all of these ways that we can heal from violences like this. But right now, we are going to head to a little break. We are going to take a break for 10 minutes, I believe. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. But we'll come back
I think we
and
should do 5.
we'll do a 5 minutes. So we'll be back at 6:30 Central, 5:30 Eastern.
7:30 Eastern.
So just kidding, 7:30 Eastern. My bad, everybody. Okay, see you in 5.
Honeys was wearing Sassoon, now it's 95 and they clock me and watch me diamond shining. It's all good from Diego to the Bay. No city is the bomb if the city make it pay. Throw up a finger and feel the same way. Straight putting it down for California, yeah. West Coast. Fresh out of jail, California dreaming. Soon as I step on the scene, I'm hearing hoochie screaming. Fiending for money and alcohol. The life of a West Side player with counts die and a strong ball. Only in Cali will we riot, not rally to live and die. In LA we wear chucks, not valleys. That's right. Dressed in loafs and khaki suits and ride is what we do. Flossing but half caution, we collide with other fruits. Famous because we drum trans. Worldwide, let them recognize some Long Beach and Rosecrans. Pumping and grinding like a slow jam. It's West Side, so you know the road down to no man. Say what you say, but give me that bar beat from Dre. Let me serenade the streets of LA. From Oakland to Sacktown, the Bay Area and Blacktown. Cali is ready, put they Mac down. Give me love. South Central. That's right. Yeah, we'll make it shake. Shake it, Cali. Shake it, Cali. West Coast. Long Beach in the house. Yeah. Oaktown. Oakland definitely in the house. Frisco, yeah, Frisco. And you know LA up in this. Pasadena, where you at?
All right, we are back. That was super interesting to see that Miriam is team Death Row Records. I would have thought that she would have been on Biggie's side, but I like it. Representing Brooklyn, but that's all right. I like Tupac. All right, so welcome back. We are gonna get into more activities about putting it together, or talking about current context for justice as well as practicing, because I think that's just really important to include in popular education. Just kidding, I'm reading what we just did. If we could move to the next one, that would be great. Okay, so we're gonna do another activity on the current context for justice. So I have been doing this activity with Black and Pink Milwaukee for a while. So just want to give a shout out to them about mainstream visibility and punitive justice. I think it's just really important for people to talk about, like, what are wins? What do those wins mean? Like, in the mainstream, what is being celebrated? What's being looked at as creating a more just world? And what are the actual impacts of that? Just so that we're aware that we're not falling into the traps that look so good. And this activity is inspired by Dean Spade's lecture that he did in 2016. I remember when I was dating my wife being like, you have to listen to this, lecture. It's so amazing. I listened to it a few times. She's like, that's the length of a movie. And I was like, it's worth it. It's worth it. But okay, anyway, so the activity is So first, I'm just going to ask you, what are some things commonly understood as victories or wins for criminal justice reform? And you can type any of that into the chat. Just what are some wins? They don't have to be ones that you agree with. When I do this in person, what I do is just write it on the wall, on chart paper, on a whiteboard, chalkboard, anything, just so people can see it all together. So people are starting to write stuff. Body cams, e-monitoring, police getting convicted of murder, community policing, probation. Yeah, absolutely. Civilian review. There's so many. Getting rid of for-profit prisons, escalation of force guidelines or scales, bail reform, school resource officers, therapeutic court, implicit bias training. Yeah, all of these are seen as major wins. Community oversight and accountability. Person feels shame, bad for the rest of their life. Co-responder, mental health models. Payouts to the victims of the gun trace task force. This happened yesterday. Harsher sentences for sex offenders. Formerly incarcerated individuals getting back their right to vote in some states. More diverse cops and judges, yes. New training facility, yeah. Progressive prosecutors. Someone shared our cops had implicit bias training. I don't think it was super helpful. Okay, great. Yeah, all of these cops becoming RJ practitioners. Please feel free to keep adding stuff that is celebrated. So if we were in person, there would be a whole wall of all of these things that are just really celebrated, and we would just look at it. And we'd start picking out some of them. So, okay, I'm gonna just pick one from the top that we can dissect a little bit. Okay, electronic monitoring. So when we're looking at electronic monitoring, what is viewed as the problem? What did this fix? What did electronic monitoring save or address? How did it make the world more just according to mainstream culture? Overcrowded prisons. People aren't in prisons anymore, so it's better. People spending less time in prison. Overcrowding in jails and prisons, it's cheaper. We're seen as that. Yeah, exactly. So progressive prosecutors, what is seen as the problem? What was offered at, they're more humane? Yeah. What is progressive prosecutors, what problem does that seem to solve? Thinking there'll be more equitable in punishments. Yeah, to stop mass incarceration. The criminal isn't bad enough to go to prison. Oh yes, this is overcriminalization. Yeah, so we're supposed to be so excited because there's a prosecutor that showed up at a BLM event or something, and this is supposed to make things so much better. And then we can talk about one last one. Okay, so we saw, yeah, they care about us. Is the idea, is like what the problem was that was saved. So when we're thinking about implicit bias trainings, what is the problem? Racism. Yep. Yeah, and exactly, one training won't make someone racist. The system isn't designed to avoid bias, it's designed to embrace bias. Who's teaching them? It's not a checkbox, it's a continual practice. Yeah, and then the job itself is just an extremely racist, like, you're a prosecutor, like your job is to uphold the state. I don't like, it literally doesn't make any sense to me, the idea of a progressive prosecutor. I don't understand it. They're locking people up no matter what. Yeah, and I could go on and on about that. So let's move to the next slide. So Dean Spades, though, and I will put it in the chat eventually, the lecture. So the lecture was called When We Win, We Lose, the impacts of mainstreaming. And so what he talks about, and what I think is really important for even young people to think about, to have this critical media lens, is thinking about what are like the pitfalls of mainstreaming. So it looks like a win, but it's really not. When we win, we lose. So the ideas, they just create new forms of visibility. So when we talk about a progressive, oh, thanks, Kayla. So when we talk about progressive prosecutors, it's just a new form of visibility. It's just a new way of wrapping up a prosecutor. It's still the person who is locking people away and making sure people have really horrible lives. They might just smile when they do it. It promotes these things promote idea of conditional acceptance. Mainstreaming does. So in the terms of electronic monitoring, it's talking about, well, like, these are the people, like, we can accept people, but only if they fit a certain criteria. So when we're talking about criminal justice reform, that means like people who are in for certain offenses, but anybody else is super bad. And it makes like the grip of the PIC even tighter. It deploys the idea of deserving figures. Again, who is worthy of attention and care and support, and who's not? Like, how is the system? Yeah, it advocates for recuperative reforms. I mean, just look at this picture of this police car. That's a recuperative reform. It's all it's doing is changing. It's so for folks that so for folks that are just looking on here, the police car, it has a rainbow. It says diversity relations, and it's a police car. It says LGBTQ hate crime hotline. All it's doing is changing the face of this really evil institution. But it's not doing anything to really gut policing and offer more healing and more liberation. So again, mainstreaming perpetuates harm and violence. And sometimes this backlash actually enhances vulnerability. Yeah, propaganda. Yeah, exactly. So I just think it's really important to have this type of activity, just to also promote like media literacy, kind of like how to teach people how, when we see things, that not everything out there is actually great. Yes. So someone wrote, how about they just build a place that is all reforming for criminals, and potential for prevention is better than cure? Yeah. Yep. So check out the chat for a good conversation. We can move to the next slide. Okay. Again, so the second unit in this curriculum is about the impact of state justice on families. So in that unit, I also go through, what's in there is looking at just defining like what is the impact that happens on family, just defining what harm is to the families, and then also looking at a historical context of the impact of state violence on families, just knowing that this isn't something brand new, that it's been happening since the very creation of this country. And that the state has been separating families since forever, just to let people know that, just to contextualize. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna read one story, And then we will go through these questions just for some more practice. So if we could go to the next slide. Okay, so Julie is a mother who shares her story in the series. And her story gives a lot of context. So we'll just get into it. So Julie says, I'll tell you this sad, really terrible story. His name's Mike, and he was in Statesville for a long time. He was 18 years old and sentenced to life. He's completely rehabilitated. He's 44 years old now. His mom had a lot of health issues. He was in Statesville. She went to visit him, and she came in someone else's car, and they had a baseball bat or something in the car. They do a lot of car searches when you go to Statesville. They did a car search of her and said that the bat was a weapon and denied her visit. She went home and she contacted the warden and said, it wasn't really mine. I was in someone else's car and it wasn't a weapon. The warden says, okay, fine, your visits are restated. So fast forward a few years and her son goes to Menard. She has a lot of health issues. She goes to Menard and they have you fill out this form, your name, how many inmate visiting lists you're on, have your visits ever been denied? And it's worded kind of tricky. Have your visits ever been denied? She put no, because in her mind, that was a mistake. They let her visit that day. Then they went and they checked the record, sent her a letter saying her visits were denied for the rest of her life because she lied on the form. For 8 years, Mike and his mother wrote the warden and fought to get her back on the list. And ultimately, she died before ever seeing him again. If we could go back to the questions, the previous slide. Okay. So in the story that Julie shared, what are the physical, emotional, health, and financial impacts on family members and friends of incarcerated loved ones? Yeah, someone shared trauma over and over again. Further loss of connection. Your life is on hold when someone you love is incarcerated. More punishment, punitive systems imposed upon them as well. Yeah, exactly. It's compact trauma, economic impact, having to take time and resources to travel there and back only to be denied access over and over, worsened health due to stress and sadness. Yeah, exactly. So then number 2, how have families of people, visits aren't cheap. Nope. How have families of people who are incarcerated sought harm reduction, a lessening of suffering inflicted by punitive justice? And there's more examples and more of the stories that are shared and stuff. Writing to the warden or jail admin. Yep. Julie was also talking about, I can just add this because it was just a small blurb, but how people were doing ride shares. Okay, we can move to number 3. They're not given many avenues to seek harm reduction. That's true. Okay, so for their number 3, it says, where do you see opportunities for positive intervention or harm reduction that would support the person who is incarcerated and their families? Get rid of prisons. Yep. What can we do as we're moving towards that horizon? What are things that we can do to lessen some suffering? reunification, right? Yeah. And actually in the curriculum, there's a part where we talk about, not where we, but where it talks about the reunification rides in Chicago. Slash PD budgets, not sentence teens to life in prison, defund policing, fund social welfare programs, efforts to get them released, clemency petitions. Could they have a system set up for them to contact their family if they're unable to visit? Free phone calls, free transportation for family members to get their loved ones, have specific staff to help family navigate the system and review rules that cause undue burden. Writing letters. Ask the mother what kind of action would support her efforts to see her son. Ban solitary confinement. All of these are beautiful ideas. Every single one of them, even down to getting rid of prisons, are ones that, and I'm sure you all know, that people are working on now. So yes. And so then the last question is, in what ways are prisons isolating? In all ways, yeah. By design. Yeah, they're isolating by design, all. Physically disconnect you from loved ones and community. Yeah, I mean, you all are right, exactly. They're super horrible places for all of the reasons, for every reason. If we could go to the next slide. Oh, and then the next one after this one too. Okay, so in the curriculum, I also talk about like what are ways that people can get involved. I think it's so important that especially when we're talking about really harmful situation, violence, really sad, like give people an idea of what they can do to help. How can you lessen suffering? What way can you contribute to the efforts to dismantle prisons or just help people get their needs met? So I listed 2 resources that are just right here, but there's also more in the curriculum for if you were going to use this in your communities, you could say, hey, you can, here's ways that people connect to letter writing, or if you want to put some money towards reunification rides and stuff like that. But here are 2 resources, the mutualaidhub.org, where you can just look to see what are the mutual aid projects that are happening around the country, and then Transform Harm just has like literally lots of articles, curriculum, just anything that if people wanted to get more educated on these topics. And so then I put this note to share. So I've learned from experience how important it is to share next steps. I had once done, a few years ago, did a carceral feminism 101 training, and the conversations were great, but they were just so heavy, just talking about carceral feminism, just the idea of solving violence with violence. That's essentially what we were talking about, and talking about criminalized survivors, people who are currently incarcerated for acts of self-defense. And I had only planned enough time to be able to get through walking through the steps. What's the history? What is carceral feminism? What's the history of it? How is it being done? And then I ended it there. We didn't have enough time. There weren't any next steps. And it was just like the saddest, like it was just so heavy just to leave and not be like, and this is how you can get involved. And this is what you can do. Like you just never want to, I can't stress it enough. You don't want to leave people without having like some glimmer of hope or like some way that they can contribute to the work that's happening, because there's so much work that's happening constantly. And if there's a project that you want to work on, just do it. It's just so important for us to just tell people their avenues that they can get involved. And I hope that this seems like a really obvious thing to people, because I just learned a super hard way. that you just have to give people next steps, or at least practice. So let's say it's not like when you're talking about like the justice, let's say you can only get through talking about punitive justice, share a story. What are the practices, like how in the curriculum we talk about what are ways to support survivors? Even just giving people those skills to walk away from is just important, so that they know, like, okay, well, this is something that I can actually, this is my takeaway. I learned about this horrible stuff, but like, here's how I can like work towards the cultural shift to make things different. So yeah, I really hope that seems like a no-brainer to you all, because that just wasn't a really fun experience of leaving people hanging. Okay, so we're gonna move to the next slide. Wow, we are at our last activity. Okay, so as I had said before, sometimes you are plugging people into campaigns that they can support, different people that they can put, different ways they can put money towards more justice, or it's just a practice. So one thing that I created in here that has been shared in many different spaces in many different ways is just how can we think about justice beyond the state? And so these are just a bunch of questions to leave people with, have a conversation with. And it's just an activity where you're just practicing and thinking. Okay, so I want you to think of a time when you could have called the police or the state or any other entity to help to handle a harmful or violent situation, but you used a different method instead. So just think about that time. Could have relied on the state or punitive, but you didn't. What strategies did you use to resolve the conflict, and what resources did you use? Just think about that. If you want to share, you can put it in the chat, but no pressure. But just think about it. I think it's really important for people to think about how we're doing this kind of stuff already. It's not funded. Maybe we want more people. We need extreme cultural shifts, but it's so important to think about, like, we're doing this, like right now, we're practicing, we're working towards that horizon of abolition. Just get people to think about it. So you can think about that for a moment, take like a minute. You can share, not share, whatever you want. Okay, so someone shared that they have safety plans with people in their circle. Someone shared that the Denver DSA does jail support. Volunteers sit outside the jail and offer people being released snacks, water, use of a phone charger, cigarettes, and other resources. Someone offered a curriculum that I'm definitely gonna check out. Another person said, I'm working with neighborhood orgs and wards to prevent conflict from happening in the first place by building relationships with their neighbors. That's amazing. Yeah, so the next question, or let's see, finding a mediator who the instigator would listen to that helped talk him down from making a bad decision. It took hours to talk to him and get through to him, but it was worth it. Situation was a very misogynistic man who wouldn't listen to me or other friends, asking him to not drive drunk from our home after what was supposed to be a very dry event. I just want to thank everyone for sharing anything that you have throughout this whole space, but particularly this. I know that these aren't easy things to share or think about. So I really appreciate everyone's participation. And then another question, we can move on to the next question. It would be, what support network needed to be in place for you to use this alternative route? What was the infrastructure that you used? Okay, someone said relationships, a lot of time, asking loved ones what their contacts or safety plans are if someone is concerned for their well-being. So knowing who we are supposed to call, what to do, etc. I had gotten support and training to build the communication skills I needed to de-escalate the situation. All right, again, thank you to everybody who's sharing. This helps us all think about what are ways that we can practice more safety beyond the state. We can move to the next question where it asks, or it states, if you have not solved a problem without involving the state, what prevented you from being able to find alternatives? What would need to change in order to help you resolve the conflict without the state? So let's say there's a dire situation where you need it to invoke. It could be, you don't have to talk about anything confidential here. Actually, please don't. I mean, you can't, yeah. But like, think about like you've had to call Child Protective Services or you've had to call the police or something. What, it's not a question to ask like as a piece of shaming to say like, oh, that was really messed up. But like, what are the conditions that would need to change in order for us to not have to rely on those situations in some situations? Someone wrote, easy access options for action during a moment of crisis. 911 is such an easy option that we are bombarded with, so that's often people's first thought. Emergency response teams, especially for child abuse. Local rapid response teams trained for specific issues. Neighbors committed to not calling the police. The community needs to get back to what a community really is, like looking out for each other to prevent certain things. Emergency response teams for domestic violence survivors. Emergency crisis lines. Programs like DASHR modeled after CAHOOTS. Yeah, mandated reporting laws are huge barriers. Mental health first aid training to intervene safely in various situations. Medical support without police automatically coming. Community rapid response teams trained to handle mental health crises in all different situations. Yeah, and really, so I'm really glad to be in community, at least right now with everybody in here, we're all thinking about it. But just think about like if you're having these conversations in high schools or even younger settings, just giving people like more, like you're planting seeds so people can think about at younger ages, like what is that horizon that we're working for? Like, what does it actually look, feel like? What, like giving people like some type of image to go after. Okay, someone said community clinicians and support groups. therapists who are committed to not relying on the state. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so if you were, we can conclude that activity right there. Thank you everybody for sharing on that part. The next questions would be geared towards if you were actually using and working with the curriculum, how can we imagine that people would get the families that they share, what type of, I'm hearing background noise. I'm not entirely sure where it's coming from. Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Just thinking about the families, a lot of the families that share their stories talk about what type of justice they would actually want. So just think through like having conversations, what could make these families receive more justice that they wanted. So that concludes for our activities that we go into the curriculum. If we could go to the next page. Okay, so here's our question, answer, and discussion section. If you have specific questions for me, I can definitely try as hard as I can. Some questions that I have for us to think about would be, how could you use this curriculum? How are you already having these conversations? And what resources have you been using? We can talk about that. But if anybody has any questions for me. Okay, so I have one question right here. It says, I'm interested what age groups you are imagining creating the curriculum. So as I was creating it, I was thinking for as young as like middle school to beyond that. But I was thinking any younger than that, it might be a little bit too more complex, or just maybe more reading. But yeah, definitely more middle school to high school. Okay, so someone wrote, as a mandated reporting service provider, what are some non-punitive and independence prioritizing services I can refer LGBTQ plus TAY youth who are either engaged in the sex or drug industry or who are currently DV or IPV survivors? So I would say right now, just because of mandated reporting laws, which are laws that have people, you call child protective services, it all varies on different states. I'm in Wisconsin. If you suspect abuse is happening, you're supposed to call child protective services. That's a short little story about that. So what are the services? So I don't there's not any group that you can go to, but there's an organization called Generation 5. And they actually created a workbook. I'm gonna find it really quick. What are ways that you can support people, young people who might be experiencing childhood sexual abuse, and what are ways to actually address that harm. Otherwise, it has to do a lot with safety planning with young people, just knowing who are the people, just what are the things that are going to keep them safe. Safety planning and knowing your people, who are the people that in your network that don't call the police, who are the people that you can turn to that aren't going to automatically go. Oh, thank you so much to whoever put the Generation 5. It's an incredible handbook. When it came out, I printed it. I have the whole thing. Yeah. Yeah, if people have other ideas too, that'd be great. But it really has to do with what's your underground network of people, because it just, for so many reasons, there just isn't one standout. Okay, someone said, I would like to use this with the high school leadership council of an out of school time program. I'm trying to remember to move at the speed of trust. How do you introduce this with high schoolers, especially if the young people themselves haven't expressed wanting to discuss the PIC? I think that moving at the speed of trust, how do you introduce? I think that, okay, so my experience, I've been, like I said, a youth worker ever since I was a teen myself. And particularly, I used to work for the Boys and Girls Club. And I remember when I was in my early 20s and trying to do like circles, like processes with young people who are experiencing harm with each other, just bullying, using circles for bullying. And I was like, for the first one, just like completely laughed at through the whole time because they were just like, who are you? Like trying to teach us this after school special kind of stuff. They thought it was hilarious, but like you just keep practicing and you keep building those connections and having restorative conversations. That's how you can plant the seed toward wanting to talk about more things and just asking questions like, why should we treat each other with respect, or why would you say something like, I'm blanking on the top of my head about specific ways that you can actually plant those seeds, but just having conversations, and then you can move into more. Yeah, somebody wrote, start with where they're at. What are their experiences with punishment? Yeah, just starting where they're at.
I want to just add in here. I mean, I've been working with young people for much longer than I would like to admit. And I want to say that for me, they're always so receptive to having conversations based in story. If you can get them to share stories from their own lives, from the lives of people that are in their communities, that they're tied to, that they have connection to, you can almost talk about anything at any time. Sorry.
No, go for it.
The thing that's useful about this curriculum is that it's deeply based in story. It's audio stories. It's listening to people tell and narrate their experiences. So many possibilities arise from that. And so I think we have less trouble getting young people engaged than we often think about when we're in analytical land. And I think that's really important. Second thing I dropped in the chat, a new resource that was just released this week that some social workers created that are alternatives to calling the child welfare system in Illinois. And those folks are happy to work with people in other jurisdictions to see what other opportunities there are to use other forms of support rather than a law enforcement based form of support. People don't understand that child welfare is a form of law enforcement. And people think they're services. No, they're actually law enforcement. And if you don't think about that and know that, you're often putting people in greater danger by relying on them. And the last thing I want to say is this is in response to a question that was asked earlier. And that is that Shira Hassan, my good friend and collaborator, says this a lot. We have to get past the notion that services equal safety. And that has become a thing that happens, particularly with people who are in professionalized fields, that the thing is immediately to think of services when sometimes what people just need is an opportunity to think through with another person what they can do themselves with the resources they can try to find in their local communities that may not be social service focused or social service determined. Because let's be real, a lot of social services now are carceral in nature. They really tie their work directly to police and policing. They tie their work to systems of oppression and punishment. They themselves are incredibly punishing. So it's not just throw a service at it, it's what is it that somebody needs and what can we find that fits to support that person in the least carceral way as possible. So I just want to put that out there for us to be thinking about because services don't necessarily always equal safety for people. So we have to go deeper and we have to help young people go deeper too along those lines. Doesn't mean we shouldn't offer services. Of course, if people need it, they need it, but we need to be critical in what we are doing. And by critical, I don't mean like naysay. I mean like
Miriam, I think you got cut off for the very last part.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're okay.
My internet is unstable for some reason. I don't understand. But yeah, I was just saying we have to just make sure that we are critical. And by I said, but critical, I don't mean naysaying. I mean thoughtful in how we interact and what we do with people and what we offer, and also what we help people to reclaim their agency to come up with for themselves. So many of us really know best what we need. Sometimes when we're in crisis, it's very hard to figure out what that is. What helps is having somebody to accompany us through that. At its best, that's what transformative community accountability work is about. It's about accompaniment. It's not about leading people. It's not about pushing people. And it's certainly not about making decisions for people, but it's accompaniment. It's being beside you while you figure out what you need in the time that it takes you to figure that out. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Miriam. And then that also made me think that this summer we did a Care Not Cops teach-in, where we go into like how to use the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective's pod mapping resource, which is again just safety planning essentially. It can just walk you through how to do it. All right. Anything else? I'm gonna look back in the chat. I'm just looking.
Looks like people are offering ways that they're going to use the curriculum. I'm seeing here, I really want to use the curriculum, use curriculum like this, and already hosting a workshop on the PIC to radicalize my social work grad school class, or at least teach them that they can be our agents of harm sometimes. There is so much unawareness of how social work perpetuates the carceral state and medical industrial complex. It's so infuriating, frustrating. Yes, I hear this a lot. It's wonderful, though. I've seen Abolitionist Social Work Network just launch. I don't know if people have seen. They're on. I'm gonna find their handle on Twitter, but yeah, I love the fact that radical social workers are reimagining their own profession or vocation, and are challenging it from the inside. And I think that often helps such a. Sorry, can you hear me now? I'm also again unstable.
Yeah.
That having the challenge from the inside can be helpful because it forces people to reckon in a way that outsiders coming in and telling you you're doing everything terribly often doesn't get heard.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you have anything else? It sounded like you were cut off abruptly. Did you want to add anything else?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah, Miriam.
I
Yeah.
was cut off again. Oh no. Okay, forget it. I'm gonna put the handle for the social work abolitionist group in there. Yeah.
Okay, dope. Dope, thanks. Someone else had written this curriculum could be used within grassroots community-based social justice orgs and networks to illustrate how the punitive model inflicts greater harm and how restorative approaches often fall short and or require resources unavailable to survivors and grassroots community groups, and to guide that org or network into developing a TJ community accountability framework. Someone said, my heart and brain is exploding with all of these resources of care in the room. Yeah, I second that. Someone said, I'm going to bring this back to the New York Transformative Hubs Study and Action Group. I think this resource can and should be used with teachers. Education can be such a punitive space where teachers act like cops. Yes. Oh my goodness. I know, after I was thinking, I had like known that this workshop was going to be taking place since like August. And then like more recently, I was like, oh, I would like love to like have a space where we can just like get together and talk. Like, what are the ways that we are already like navigating this system? How are we, like, I would just love to do that. So be on the lookout. I'll put my email address. You can follow me, or my group is Black and Pink Milwaukee. Kayla, if you're still on, if you could put our Facebook on there. We try to create little spaces as well, just to keep these conversations happening, because I know that we're all here. We're trying to figure out how to do this. It's just so hard to navigate and talk about all the things that we do that we're not supposed to. Let's see, somebody wrote, thanks, Kayla put it in there. Okay, someone said, I've been using curriculum like this as well as Beyond Survival to incorporate an abolitionist framework to my student organizing group that focuses on sexual violence. There's a lot of carceral feminism in survivor spaces and on college campuses. Yes, absolutely, 100%. Someone shared they had a teacher in elementary school who also worked as a cop. But yeah, as someone had mentioned before too, teachers can be so punitive and so punishing. But that's why you have to tune back into Miriam's teaching about how we don't do that. Yeah, Sarah wrote that you can also follow us at Black and Pink on Instagram. All right, does anybody have any last questions, last thoughts? Somebody shared organizing spaces and have a lot of conversations about how to deal with people who cause harm in organizing spaces. I can relate to that. I see my friend Jenny's face on the screen and I keep just looking at her. Hi, Jenny. Like that I'm like talking like to you, like, hey, like this is me, you, and like this slideshow. Okay. Okay. Hey. Yes, and let's dance. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if anybody, I'm pretty much done. If any, no more questions, could get some Mario Kart in tonight. If we end here. Thank you all so much for joining, sharing, all of it.